All right. Hey, Masters, welcome to another episode of Path to Mastery. And today we have the smiling Aaron and Jocelyn with us. How you guys doing?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah.
David. Excited to get on this relationship mastery path.
Yeah, man. Thank you. I'm excited too. It was awesome. It was awesome to meet you guys at the Genius Network. And I heard you guys speak. You did a presentation and I said, wow, that's amazing. I said, I can relate. I have a wife and we certainly don't see eye to eye on everything. And
Mm.
so I think this is a topic that probably most people are going to relate to, So
Oh,
thanks for being
yes.
here.
Oh, thanks for having us. Let's talk all things relationship, marriage, conflict, the real things that happen.
No, none of that ever happens, does it? I'm kidding. All right. So a little bit about you guys, and then we'll just jump into it. Okay. So you're the authors of the New Power Couple and the Argument Hangover, which hits the shelves next month, February 2021.
Yeah.
Already a #1 new release. With much excitement, they founded and launched the Empowerment Couples University, which is an online university where busy couples unlearn healthy patterns and gain modern relationship skills. Man, that sounds exciting. And, you guys are sought after relationship coaches. You've worked with celebrity couples, public figures, and thousands around the world. You shared the stage with Tony Robbins, which is really cool. I didn't know that. You were nominated as Arizona's 40 under 40 influencers, and you've been featured in national media, teaching couples modern, practical tools to work together through any life challenge, and reaching over 809,000 people around the world. So, man, it's an honor to have you guys. I did not even know you guys were that cool. So thank you.
We-
It's a
Besides
good
hearing
reminder for
you,
myself too. I didn't know I was
Yeah.
that cool either.
I just
we
heard
look
you.
casual, but we're actually very chic and
Yes. Awesome. So, again, it's cool to have you here. I was kind of joking around before we started, but I'm like, I'm actually a good client because I have a wife and we we definitely don't see eye to eye all the time. It's actually a tough conversation, a topic to talk about sometimes, right? Because you don't
yeah.
want to admit that you do have conflicts with
That's
your
the
wife
key.
and
I
stuff.
mean, you just to really talk about
Mm.
that, we live in a society where everyone glorifies finding the one, getting engaged, getting married, and we have this fantasy idea of relationships and one that doesn't often include the conflicts that happen. And then what do people do? They keep it behind closed doors. You go to gatherings, how are you guys? Oh, we're good. Everyone's inauthentic. I mean, I know that's a strong word, but holding back the things that 99.9% of couples are facing. So, one of the things that we like to talk about is the difference between a fantasy idea of love and relationships and a true healthy relationship that does include conflict. And we want to
Mm.
dispel this idea that you need to keep that hush hush and you shouldn't tell people about that. We need to all be more authentic that that's happening in our relationships.
Well,
Well,
also
does social
because
media, but and we'll get you in a minute, Aaron. Does social media play into that though too? Because in everybody on social media, everybody has the perfect life, and you
Right?
share all the great stuff, right?
Absolutely. You see all the vacate. I love how many messages we privately get as being coaches for couples where their last few posts were like happy as a family on vacation and they're messaging us like we're fighting all the time, like
Mm,
we're lucky that people tell us that, but most people wouldn't know. It looks like they have a perfect life.
yeah, yeah. And I'm sorry, I jumped in. You were gonna say something, Aaron?
oh yeah, well, I was just reflecting on that. It's really about a comparison, right? And so when you're comparing your relationship to someone else's, then you have social media where you can see thousands of people's relationship, you get a misperception of other things that happen within the relationship. So if you're having conflict and all the places I compare a good relationship, I don't see conflict there. What else am I supposed to expect except there's something wrong with ours?
Mhm.
so
Mm,
so bringing that back around to what you said in the beginning, I think there's a big difference between seeing eye to eye and conflict. I think those are different things. I don't think you should expect to always see eye to eye with your partner, but that's different than conflict. See, the whole point is if we can embrace that we do see things differently, but not
mm,
react to each other from emotional triggers, not say things or do things that are more hurtful, or even just say and do things that have us pit one another against each other, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we just see things differently. Okay, well, great. Tell me more about that. Maybe there's a new view I can take on. Maybe there's a whole other view that when we bring our two together, we come up with a third that we never saw before. So yes, you will never see things eye to eye, but you don't have to have that go into a place of doing emotional damage to your partner and getting into a conflict leading into a hangover.
Yeah, I love that. You know, when I heard you guys speak at that meeting, one of the things that really stood out to me was, and I shared this with my wife, and she related, was, sometimes, like, and maybe I'm paraphrasing, but it's not like we end up fighting about how we fight at, like, it's at first,
Right.
like the thing that started it, but then all of a sudden, because of the way we are, it just like it
Yeah.
intensifies it, and yeah.
Oh, can I jump in on that? Because what you're
Yes.
speaking to is how the topics that usually spark a disagreement aren't usually that life altering or that important. Once in a while, for sure, there are serious topics that come up. But like you said, it's how you fight that starts to become what you talk about. Don't talk to me that way. Don't raise your voice at me. Like oh, you're calling me just like my mom again. And so now you're not talking about the original topic. You're talking about how you're fighting. And that's what we even call that period of how long you're disconnected after a fight. We coined a phrase, the argument hangover. And so then couples are in this argument hangover period, and maybe it's hours, maybe it's days. We've talked to couples that are in an argument hangover for weeks or months. That is the key, is not to avoid conflict. It's to instead shorten the argument hangover period. Don't say, oh, we shouldn't be fighting anymore. No, aim to shorten how long you're disconnected afterwards. Repair it faster.
Well, yeah, and on a path to mastery would also be to keep it from escalating. Just like you said, to keep it from going and starting from one thing and then having what you do and say actually escalate it and do more damage. Like that and shortening the argument hangover period, that's the path. That's the mastery path right there to conflict in marriage.
So what are some, and I do want to get into your book in a minute, with regard to this, like, what are are there some cues or some ways to pick, like, when you, like for me, I'll share an example. Like, I know I come from a really dysfunctional family childhood. My father was abusive to my mom. There was a lot of screaming, yelling, and then I would hear screaming, hitting, all crazy stuff. Right. So in my mind, I don't raise my voice. I'm calm, I'm collective, but my wife, on the other hand, and her family, that's what they do. Everybody screams at each other. It's like common, just the way I think it's the way they are in real life, but then when they fight, it's intensified. So for her and I, yeah, it sometimes will just, like, I'm literally like calm and calm and calm and calm. And then all of a sudden I'll just like explode. Like, what the hell? You know what I mean? Is that common, or just the way, the lack of communication, I guess, or
well,
I don't know if I'm asking this question right.
No, I get it. It's like you have different ideas of what's okay in conflict. And interestingly, so I grew up in a household where my parents went from being madly in love, people envied their relationship, to yelling, slamming doors, divorce court, police called. And as a child, I was like, how is that possible? How is it possible to go from love to kind of hate? But regardless, I started to repeat those same patterns. And so I started to repeat, if I feel mad, I can take out my anger on the partner. If I feel sad, I can just cry and get all the attention. And so I started to repeat it. Whereas Aaron, you grew up in a house, briefly share, because his was totally different and we had different styles of fighting.
Well, I grew up in a really faith-based home and even went to a Christian K through 12. So that was kind of my upbringing, going to church every Sunday, also Wednesdays. So when my parents would even start to get into a disagreement, I always watched my dad just, like, he just basically stopped talking and would just like walk away.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, without, being a younger kid, I would watch that. And so I wouldn't see it erupt. So that seemed like that was a win, right? Like, oh, that must be a good way to do it. What else do I know? So then I get together with Jocelyn, and that's just natural. I can just repeat the same thing that I saw my dad do. But for a relationship, that just had Jocelyn feel isolated, pushed away. It's easy to call it shut down, or like the Gottmans call it like stonewalling. So from an energy, from an engagement perspective, I'm like literally just like ignoring the conversation. And though for me, in my mind, I'm like, this is a total benefit for you. Like, you don't want me to say what I'm thinking.
Sure.
So that is a benefit to me. However, it is an interesting way to think about, that's a way to control and dominate, like actually being quiet. Often we think, well, the controlling person is one that's like saying how the conversation is going to go, whose voice is the loudest. But really, you want to control a conversation, say nothing. What else can the other person do? So an unintended outcome is that Jocelyn felt very controlled, as well as isolated and shut out. And again, that was like out of the most positive intent for me. So we really got to look like, well, whatever we sort of model, we need to come to a place where we're actually consciously choosing our response to have us both stay connected in conflict and be on the same team, rather than anything else that we model or try to avoid modeling, kind of like you did. Does it disconnect us when we have a difference of opinion, or does it bring us on the same side? It's really a great place to start to look.
Yeah, that's good. It's funny, just you pretty much described me. That's kind of like what I'll do. I'll just kind of shut down and like you said, I'm thinking, okay, well, hey, I'm doing good because I don't want to engage, and I see my crazy father and I don't want to be that, you know what I mean? So I'm just like kind of shutting down, and then she wants the engagement. She wants to discuss it. You know what I mean? And yeah, and there's a huge disconnect there,
Mm-hmm.
Is
Yeah,
that
and
really
that
common?
Oh, so common. And
Totally.
we actually have an entire chapter dedicated to what we call the communication personality types. And so in a lot of relationships, people hear the phrase opposites attract. And that's true in many ways. Of course, not always, like nothing is 100%. But what we find is there are a lot of couples who are opposite in that one is more assertive and one is more reserved when it comes to communicating about matters. And so the two of you, it sounds like, she wants to talk about it now. She's got an assertive talk. She's willing to speak up, say what's on her mind. She wants it to be known. Whereas you might be more of a silent processor. Gather your thoughts, then communicate it, but it's got to be on your time. And so the thing is, it's not about changing each other's communication personality type. It's about learning more about it, which of course is a way we can help, but also to leverage each other's personality type. So as a quick example, because I'm more like your wife, like my tendency is to be more assertive. If it's on my mind, I would be like, I'm talking about it and you're going to hear me. What I learned though was, like you mentioned, it would have him kind of feel pressured and shut down. So what I do now as the assertive partner is I give him a heads up if there's something I want to talk about. Hey, I think we should talk about the idea of having a child. Like that's something we are talking about right now. But I know it's best for you when you can give it some thought beforehand.
And I think for a reserve type, and we say reserve, it doesn't mean like shy, for instance. It just means that
I get it.
You're wanting time to like process your emotion. For me, if I didn't have like the words for what I was feeling, I didn't want to just start talking, because I didn't want to fumble over my words. I didn't want to sound stupid. I didn't want to sound like I was confused. And so I just needed some time to process and like get the words together. So when we talk about reserve type, we know that you might not always set up conversations that way. Like, hey, I have something I want to talk to you about. It's a good thing, but you will have those moments where something happened and now you feel like, I don't know how we got in this conflict. So for a reserve person, it's important to communicate as much as you can, meaning say, hey, something's coming up for me, and I would just like to request 5 minutes to process that through, and we'll come back to this conversation. How does that sound? Right. So that's more of a momentary. It's like you're starting to get into it and you're like, okay, wait a second. Let's take a pause. Is it okay if I take 5 minutes just to get my thoughts together? We'll come back to this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How do you do that, man? I mean,
Just like exactly what he said.
Yeah, no, I know. It's just, you're in that heat. It's like usually you don't even realize you need to do that until you're starting to get heated, at least in my case.
Well, that's where
Well, one quick thing on that, actually,
we're both passionate about this.
I want to go back to the path of mastery too, because when you think about mastering anything, the first thing you need is awareness of being able to do something different. So now for you, David, and all the listeners here, when you get into a conflict, you'll probably start in on the old patterns, but then you'll remember, oh, I heard on the Path to Mastery podcast that there's a different way, right? So the awareness starts to break that pattern. So even if you thought about it on the next conflict, that's a step ahead.
Yes.
Then the next conflict you have, maybe you remembered it within like 5 seconds, right? So it's really just about bringing that awareness closer and closer to change your response. Yeah.
Do you guys have like an agreement? So I guess a good question would be like, how did you guys come into this, right? Like, how did this start? And do you have an agreement now? Because I get what you're saying, but sometimes I'll want to be like, hey, wait, you need to kind of calm down, but she doesn't want to do that at the moment, right? Or sometimes it'll be the other way around. So how did you guys come to that agreement? How'd you come into this first off?
Oh gosh. Well, okay, I want to answer both of those. We do have agreements, and we actually give couples a process for creating agreements because they're critical in relationships. So yes to the agreements. In terms of how we got into this, really early on in our relationship, we did discover how much we had different pasts around relationships. We both had been hurt in different ways. We both brought in different patterns and different tendencies. And we had started our self-development journey, and we were working on our mindset, and we were working on our beliefs. Like we did things like the Landmark Forum. I'm not sure if you've done.
I went through the whole curriculum. Yeah, it's awesome.
Amazing. Okay, good.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, we did things like that, like working on ourselves. But what we realized was we weren't bringing it yet into our relationship. But then once we started doing that, couples around us were like, hey, how are you guys communicating so well? And like, you're making goals together and you're thriving as a couple. And how do we do that? And they were like, is it counseling? And we're like, no, look, our society thinks that the only solution is counseling when you're in crisis. And so what we really saw was a need in the market, to talk business lingo, of something that's more about learning skills before you're in quote unquote crisis. And so then we really created it, and of course went through years of our own training and mastering it as well. And so we created an entire curriculum, and we now train even other relationship coaches around the world. And it really came from seeing that there weren't that many resources for couples besides counseling.
Yeah. And I love all the plugs on Path to Mastery too, by the way. So thank you.
Well, I love it too, because, obviously this is the name of your podcast, but I love mastery. I love life mastery. I love all things towards mastery. And often we don't maybe use the specific term of like relationship mastery, but I'm really loving it.
Well, it's because it's a constant, always learning, it doesn't end, right? Mastery is like, there's always, in my mind, is always the next level. There's always something to learn. You're a learning based person. So yeah, that's what I love about it. Let me ask you this. I took a bunch of notes here. Healthy conflict. What's healthy conflict?
Okay. Well, like I said in the beginning, right? The goal isn't to avoid conflict. It's to unlearn unhealthy conflict and relearn healthy conflict. So healthy conflict is where, rather than you two being against each other, which is how most conflict looks, my opinion versus yours, and instead it's us against the problem. So see, we're side by side as a team against the problem. Then, of course, there's the skills, which is what we teach around recognizing when you're triggered, having agreements for times of conflict, repairing faster afterwards. And here's the thing, when you learn those skills, conflict can actually be something that leads to more bonding, more intimacy. If you want to transform yourself through recognizing what comes up in conflict. So couples miss out on the gold that's available in that conflict. What would you add about healthy conflict?
I think that was pretty good.
Okay.
I mean,
so how does, to ask you a question deeper on that, how do you learn from that? Like what does that look like?
Well, there's a number of different sort of principles out there. Esther Hicks actually has just a great reframe about, we just primarily focus on things that we don't want. So when we get into a conflict and immediately, if you're in a place of logic, you're already not on the path to mastery.
Mhm.
If you're arguing about, that's not what I said, that's not how that event went, that's not how I remembered it, then notice how you're already against each other. It's like you're trying to convince them to see it your way, and that's not being on the same side. So often we just focus on the piece of conflict that we don't want. I don't want to feel disconnected. I don't want to feel controlled. I don't want to feel dominated. I don't want to be talked down to. But in this healthy conflict, then there's always another side to the coin. Like that's the tail side, but there is a head side. And the head side is, what is this showing us that we do want instead? So if we're here and we're getting into a disagreement about, Jocelyn's like, you haven't initiated intimacy with me recently, or, you know, a partner comes in to an entrepreneur and says, you've just been working so much. What is it? You don't love me anymore? So you could have a disagreement about, well, what do you mean? I did this and this and this week. Don't you know that I love you? Well, if you really get to it, what is it that we're saying that we want? Your partner came into the room, though they said, why are you still working? Or why haven't you initiated intimacy? What is it that they're actually wanting? More intimacy, more time with you, more connection. So we just have to shift from not focusing on what is it that we don't want about this to what is it that we actually do want. And we believe there is always a positive intent to every conflict. You just have to start to look for it.
Yeah, that's a big takeaway for me right there. Because you're right. If you're getting into it about something you don't want, you just start to think about, okay, what is almost the opposite of that, right? Like,
Yes.
yeah, that's huge. What would you say is in my mind, and we touched on this a little bit, but like we could, like, I'm 100% clear. I am right. Like I'm absolutely right. And she's 100% clear. She's right. And I just can't understand. How can she not understand that my perspective?
Yeah.
It's like, is that like, that's normal, right? Like that to everybody.
Of course. Yeah. Because why? Because as human beings, we have something called the ego, and not ego in the sense that people think is like boastfulness, confidence,
Pride.
pride. More so the ego part of us likes to be right and is even willing to kill off love to be right. The ego is all about, I'm over here, you're over there. It's separation, really. And so we all have that ego part of us. And so as a human being, we can recognize the ego. There are times where I'm very aware that my ego wants to be right, but instead I choose, like, not to sound cliche, but like my heart or what's best for the relationship. And here's what blew my mind. And it did, I think, really change the way I saw communication, I saw conflict, is your reality does not mean their reality is not true. The other way, their reality does not mean your reality is not true. There isn't just one that's right. And it's funny how much we have to get only one to be right. But if you can release your grip on that and realize that's their truth, okay, that doesn't invalidate my truth. And the goal of communication isn't even to agree. That's a whole other thing. People think communication is to have one person succumb to the other one. No, the point of communication is to understand, even if you have different things, different views. Anything more you'd add about that?
No, you're doing
okay.
great.
All right,
yeah.
great.
You're doing a
saying it
great
all.
job. What would you guys, and I'll ask both of you, what would you say is the biggest challenge when it comes to this?
Well, similarly to what you're saying, there's a certain feeling of like, you're making me wrong, you're invalidating me. And so it becomes really a thing of safety, of not feeling safe. And so, but as soon as we're into this place of conflict where as soon as you're trying to convince your partner or you're trying to argue for right or wrong, you're already off the path. So conflict is really there for you to get a better understanding of your partner. And so often when I'm really feeling emotion, sometimes the only thing that's there for me to say is, hey, I really get that how you saw that experience is this, and how you're feeling about it is this.
Mm.
And there's been times where it's like that emotion is there and I don't have anything else to say. I don't have a solution to that. That's clearly not how I see it. But as soon as the goal is for one of us to be right about the situation, again, you're already now against each other. So that's really just the hardest part, is to remember there's not a winner and a loser in your relationship. And it's
Yeah.
just really, it is a hard thing to remember, that we want to turn this around to see what is the new desire for us. How could I be more understanding? And really the first thing is to just get back to the place of feeling connected. That should be the first goal. And I think for a lot of us men, we want to get to a solution, because we want to move to a solution fast because we're uncomfortable with the emotion that we're feeling now. It's really uncomfortable. We can feel tense. We can feel angry. And so the hard thing about that is we want to just avoid that and move past it. So how do we do that? Well, we come up with a solution. Can't you just move past it? Here's a solution. But that in a relationship doesn't get you further into your heart. This doesn't get into a place of emotional intelligence or emotional mastery. So, that's to me is the hard thing is, you got to stay in it sometimes to really see it from your partner's perspective. And by doing that, you can have deeper appreciation. You can have a deeper understanding of how they do see things. And that just leads to more love in a relationship.
Awesome. Give us a couple strategies now. I mean, it seems like all of this really comes down to, either lack of communication or ineffective communication. So what are a couple strategies people listening to this right now can easily kind of implement and to help in these areas?
I think we even gave several,
You
and
did.
I would encourage people to like go back and re-listen, because just hearing something once and doing nothing
Sure.
about it makes no difference. And so like if you can take one nugget from today and implement it, that's the path to mastery. But to give you additional things, I would say that it's really about focusing on becoming a better listener. So much of communication is how great of a listener are you? And here's what I would say, and this is kind of a paradigm shift, but people think that listening happens passively. Oh, I'm just automatically listening to you because I can hear you. I can audibly hear the words that you're saying. That's not listening. Listening actually takes active attention, active awareness. It actually takes effort to listen effectively, because when you aren't listening intentionally, and what we would call not listening at all, we have like a graph in our book about the 3 types of listening. When you're not listening at all, you're misinterpreting your partner. You take things personally, you get defensive, you can dismiss their feelings. And so if you can switch from thinking, oh, just because I'm hearing my partner, I know what they're saying. No, focus on listening to what emotion, need, or feeling they're trying to communicate.
Seems like that would be like a 5-day workshop or something.
Yeah. Well, you can attend actually.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you can attend this Sunday. We have a workshop.
Do you? That's awesome. Yeah. No, this is great, really great stuff, and it's not a topic I talk about at all a lot. My wife and I do, which is good, so, the makeup part's always awesome, right? Well, before we get there, Aaron, what would you say is the number one thing you want people to take from this thing today? Like if somebody just chimed in just now and this was the only thing they heard, what would be the one thing you would tell them?
For a tangible action? So I'll just do
both. Give them an
So
action. So yeah.
I really feel like the goal is to seek to understand rather than try to get them to see it your way or come to a solution. Right. Just really, and even, Chris Voss, a member of Genius Network with us, if you believe that relationship is a level of negotiation, which it is, all of life is really, the lead FBI negotiator in the world came from a foundation of empathizing with the other person. And so it really hit home for me. If someone at that level is like, empathy really is your goal. And I'm like, that's what it is for relationships as well. So just a part of being able to get yourself into a space to empathize, I think having initial agreements for your times of conflict are super critical. So what that looks like, if you just jump down to the podcast, think to yourself, in a disagreement that my partner and I have, what is the thing that typically triggers the emotion or triggers us to escalate the conflict? And it might be like swearing. It might be that your partner is like, I don't know, super animated, or they just leave the room, or they bring up something you did in the past, right? So outside of the conflict, come to your partner and say, hey, number one, my positive intent is that we are more connected and we fight smarter. We have more love. Okay, great. One of the things I notice is that when we have conflict, if one of us swears at the other, I know that that triggers more emotion in me. So I like to make an agreement that we just don't swear when we have conflict.
I can agree to that.
So even just one, just look, what is it that triggers your conflicts to get more escalated? And then in a calm state, come together with your partner and say, I'd like to make an agreement around not having, or an agreement about that during conflict. And then you can remind each other gently in that moment, and it won't feel like you're trying to control or dominate them because you've already agreed upon it ahead of time.
Yeah, it's an important conversation, and it's I'm glad we had it, honestly, because I mean, we normally talk about sales strategy, and this is different. And it's important. And it's critical. That's why when I heard you guys, I'm like, I got to talk to these guys. That was awesome. So thank you for that. We touched on the book a little bit. Obviously, for people that want to get a copy of your book, we'll tell them where to go. But I mean, how does it apply to all relationships? The Argument Hangover.
Yeah, well, the Argument Hangover, the whole purpose of the book is for any two people. Of course, we talk a lot about romantic relationships, but really the principles could be applied to any two relationships. So it could be your employees, it could be a business partner, anyone. And it's really about how do you communicate better and fight smarter. And so I think that literally any human being who has one relationship in their life should read it, so that you are staying connected. You're able to repair faster after disagreements, because life is short and we don't want to lose out on life and love being disconnected. And if it's okay to share too, for those who do feel compelled to order the Argument Hangover, we're actually giving away, because you're hearing a lot of this, and sometimes having visuals can be helpful. And so we're actually giving away $200 of bonus trainings for people who pre-order it, including trainings on handling emotional triggers, being a better listener, like so much of what we talked about, but imagine having visuals with it too, and examples where we even act it out. And so if you go to theargumenthangover.com and you enter your receipt number in there, you can get those $200 of trainings for free.
All right. Awesome. Theargumenthangover.com. So you get everything there, the book, the training. Awesome. What did I miss? Anything I didn't ask?
You asked great questions. Honestly, I think that your audience is super lucky to have you leading them to the path to mastery. And I would encourage everyone who's listened to, listen again. I think you could probably hit repeat on this episode. And then, I mean, honestly, thank you for having us. And we hope that some of you enjoy the book and the trainings that we have.
Yeah, you guys were fantastic. I can't wait to listen to it myself. I get more out of listening to it the second time than doing this, so I probably need to take one of your courses.
We'd love that. We'd love to.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. When you said you had a course coming up, when's that? I mean,
yeah, this Sunday and next Sunday, people can attend from home. So before quarantine, we held couples workshops every single month in person, and we were about to take it on tour. And so now people can attend from home, and it's from the privacy of so you're not forced to share anything, but you're really watching us, and we're guiding you through exercises. And so rather than just hearing these concepts, you can practice and have a workbook to go with it. And so for those interested, that's at thecouplesworkshop.com/dates. And you have to put the dates in there for the live dates.
So thecouplesworkshop.com/dates. Perfect. I'm going to check that out. I'm going to get a copy of your book. And again, just want to say thank you guys. It was awesome. Appreciate you.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. Love all the path to mastery.